Okay, let's just forget what you think you know about the Bible for a second. Try not to see it as some dense, dusty rulebook. Instead, think of it as maybe the greatest story ever told. Seriously, it's this epic narrative that spans thousands of years, a story of creation, a pretty catastrophic fall, and then this absolutely breathtaking plan for redemption. And believe it or not, we're going to try and cover that entire story in the next 5 minutes.
So how in the world are we going to make sense of all that? Well, we've broken this massive story down into 5 distinct acts. Think of this as our roadmap, okay? It's going to guide us from the very beginning of everything right to the climax of the entire narrative. We're just following the single overarching thread of a promise. All right, let's dive right in. Act 1. It opens on a perfect world. The story kicks off with God literally speaking the universe into existence in 6 days. You've got light, sky, land, stars, and every living creature you can imagine. And this quote right here, this points to the absolute pinnacle of that creation, humanity. God forms the first man, Adam, from the dust of the earth and breathes his own life into him. So Adam and Eve, they're placed in this perfect garden, Eden, and their whole purpose is just to live in a relationship with their creator.
But, well, that perfection gets shattered. Adam and Eve are giving total freedom with just one rule. Just one. Don't eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Their choice to disobey, that's what the Bible calls the fall. It just fractures that perfect relationship and introduces shame, conflict, and death into the world for the first time. And the consequences, wow, they escalate fast. We see the very first murder. Then things get so bad, so wicked, that God floods the entire earth to start over with just one family, Noah's. A little later, humanity's pride gets the better of them at the Tower of Babel, and that leads to them being scattered. All of this chaos, it really sets the stage for God to start a brand new long-term plan for restoration. So let's move into Act 2. This is where the story pivots from trying to fix a broken world to building a whole new nation. And it all starts with a single incredible promise. God's grand plan actually starts small, with a promise to an old man named Abraham. This isn't just a promise, it's a covenant, a sacred binding agreement. God promises to make Abraham's descendants into a great nation that will one day bless the entire world. This covenant, this is the thread that's going to pull us through the rest of the story. It gets passed down to his son Isaac, and then his grandson Jacob, whose 12 sons, they become the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay, fast forward a few hundred years. These descendants now find themselves as slaves in Egypt. But God doesn't forget his promise. He raises up a leader, Moses, to go and demand their freedom. And after a series of 10, well, devastating plagues and a completely miraculous escape right through the Red Sea, the nation of Israel is born in this incredible act of rescue. But here's the thing. Instead of going straight to the promised land, they end up wandering in the desert for 40 years. Now, this number represents a whole generation being punished for their disbelief, sure, but it's also this really crucial time where God basically teaches them how to live as his people. And during that time, at a place called Mount Sinai, God makes the covenant official. He gives them the law, including the 10 Commandments, as a framework for their whole society. He gives them instructions for the tabernacle, which is a way for him to physically dwell among them. And he sets up a priesthood to guide their worship. This is what gives this brand new nation its identity. Now we're in Act 3. After finally conquering and settling the promised land, Israel enters this long, pretty chaotic period, really struggling to hold up their end of the deal. For about 300 years, they're just stuck in this vicious cycle. They forget God and the covenant, they get oppressed by their enemies, they cry out for help, and then God sends a deliverer, a judge like Gideon or Samson. But as soon as the judge dies, the whole cycle just starts right back up again. So finally, they get tired of all this chaos, and the people demand a king so they can be like other nations. Their first king, Saul, he definitely looks the part, but his heart turns away from God. So he's replaced by David, a simple shepherd boy who, famously defeats the giant Goliath. He becomes Israel's greatest king, and he's the one God promises an eternal dynasty through. David's son Solomon, he brings Israel to its absolute golden age of wealth and power. His crowning achievement is building this magnificent temple for God in Jerusalem. But his compromises, marrying foreign women and worshiping their gods, that directly violates the covenant, and it sets the stage for the nation's downfall. And yeah, this chart pretty much shows the result. After Solomon dies, the kingdom splits in two. Both the northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah just spiral into corruption. In response, God starts sending prophets, messengers like Elijah and Isaiah, to warn them, to plead with them to return to the covenant or face judgment. So now we're in Act 4, and those warnings from the prophets become a very harsh reality. After centuries of rebellion, the consequences of breaking the covenant, they finally arrive, and it is devastating. First, the Assyrian Empire comes in and conquers the northern kingdom, scattering its people forever. Then, about 135 years later, the Babylonian Empire does the same to the south, completely destroying Jerusalem and Solomon's beautiful temple and carrying the Jewish people off into exile. At this point, the promise seems broken. The story feels like it's over. For 70 years, the people live as captives in Babylon. It's a time of immense sorrow for sure, but it's also a time where prophets like Daniel and Ezekiel are assuring them that God hasn't forgotten his promises and that a restoration is coming.
And wouldn't you know it, just like the prophets said, after 70 years, King Cyrus of Persia allows the Jews to return home. They rebuild their city, they rebuild a smaller second temple, but they're still under foreign rule. And they're waiting. They're waiting for that promised Messiah, a prophesied anointed one or king from David's line who would finally restore their fortunes. And that brings us to Act 5. After 400 years of prophetic silence, a time when the people felt a huge distance from God but were still clinging to those old prophecies, the climax that the entire Old Testament has been building towards finally begins. A baby named Jesus is born in Bethlehem, and he grows up to claim he is that long-awaited Messiah. His 3-year public ministry really rested on 3 pillars: incredible miracles that showed his power, radical teachings about the kingdom of God, and these direct, intense confrontations with the religious authorities of his day.
And this is the crucial point. Jesus claimed his impending death wasn't some tragedy, but it was his ultimate purpose. He declared it would establish the new covenant that the prophets had talked about, a new, unbreakable agreement to restore all of humanity to God, not through the old system of animal sacrifice, but through his own sacrifice. And then the story just hurtles toward its climax. Jesus is betrayed, condemned, and crucified, a brutal, shameful death. It absolutely looks like a complete and total defeat. But on the 3rd day, his followers find his tomb is empty. His resurrection from the dead becomes the cornerstone event of the entire story, seen as proof of all his claims and the ultimate victory over death itself. And this is what brings the whole story full circle. The narrative that started with humanity being kicked out of a garden because of a broken relationship, it ends with Jesus offering a new covenant. Through his life, death, and resurrection, he opens a path to a restored relationship with God for anyone who believes. It's an epic plan for redemption that its followers believe changes absolutely everything and, well, continues to shape our world today.